So, I remember last time we spent a lot of time discussing this one passage in the Talmud which suggests that, well, there's the school of opinion that stealing from a non-Jew is okay. So, and I said that the Steinsaltz footnote refers to a longer discussion in a different area of the Talmud, different place in the Talmud in Baba Kama. So I thought I would present that to you. This is a long discussion. This is the longer discussion. It's very interesting and in some ways disturbing, although I think it adds a needed context to the whole discussion. Just social relationships with non-Jews and how our laws apply and don't apply to non-Jews, and kind of what the reality was back then, which is very different than our reality. So we may not get through all this. It may take us a couple weeks. I don't think it'll take us more than 2 weeks, but I thought we would go through it. So what I've got here is, because there's actually no Steinsaltz for this, unfortunately, so I just got stuff on my computer. I'm going to read it in the original Hebrew Aramaic. The English is a Sonsino English, which is much harder to follow than the Steinsaltz English. Sonsino was the translators in the 19th century, the British translators. So for me, the Hebrew is much easier than the Sonsino English. But you can follow in the English. I think with me reading in the Hebrew and the Aramaic, and you following in the English, or you certainly are free to try to follow in the Hebrew too. Okay, so it starts with this: Ika dematne aha. So there was a teaching that goes the following: Nodrin, laharagin, v'charamin. Ulamochsin. Okay, so first of all, it says nodrin means that you can swear, but it means that you can make a false oath. So you can make false oaths to the following people: people that are trying to kill you, people that are trying to steal from you, or lemochsin. So mochsin means customs collectors. Mochet mokes is still to this word. So another and the reality here seems to be, or the story seems to be that a robber comes up to you and says, "Give me all that money over there, or I'll kill you." You're allowed to say that money doesn't belong to me. That money, in fact, belongs to the government. So you want to steal from me, fine, but you'd be stealing from the government, and that's a lie. So you're allowed to make, and I swear, you're allowed to make that lie to someone who's coming to rob from you, who's allowed to coming to kill you, but also someone who's collecting taxes from you. Well, that's okay. So that's how it starts. All right. So I'm going to stop the class right now.
Yeah.
And now you know how to fill out your tax returns. No, yeah. So this is a long discussion, and we're going to try to get through the ins and outs of it. She shall truma. So truma is the tithe that you give to the priest. So you can lie and say it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the government, or shehi shall beit melech, or that it belongs directly to the government, to the king. Afal bi she'eina shel truma. So you can say that it's not truma. Afal pi she'eina shel melech, and even if it doesn't belong to the king, you're allowed to make that. Okay, so of course we understand the lying to the robber. We understand lying to the person who's trying to kill you. Hamar Shmuel ulamochsin. But what about customs collectors? So Shmuel brings an objection. Hamar Shmuel. Dina de malchuta dina. So his obvious exception is the law of the land is the law. It's a very famous Talmudic principle. You follow the law of the land. It doesn't matter what Jewish law might teach you. We follow that we are good citizens. And that's a Talmudic principle. We Jews are good citizens and we follow the land. And if you're saying we can cheat the tax collector, then what about dina de malchuta dina? Okay, so Shmuel has a good objection to that. Okay? And now we start to get into what the Talmud is very good at, right? It's finding exceptions and nuances and trying to mold hard principles, into a reality that we can live with. So, Rabbi China bar Kahana, Rabbi China son of Kahana, says, Amar Shmuel, and Shmuel actually here quoting Shmuel, Bimokes she'ein lo kitzva. Okay, so there's custom collectors that have no limit. So when by no limit here, it means that they're corrupt. So they're not following government regulations of 10% or whatever you owe. They're going to say 10%, and you give me another 5% for my wife and children. You give me another 20% for my brother-in-law, and so and of course this was going to be the reality. So we're very fortunate to be, and I say this with not tongue in cheek, to be in a relatively non-corrupt society. Right? I know everybody's laughing at me, but we are. Right? We're in a relatively non-corrupt society compared to where most of our grandparents grew up, great-grandparents grew up, where you did not trust the tax collectors, and you could probably assume that the tax collectors and government officials were in it for their own money, right? And they were pocketing stuff on the side. So what did you do? What did you do when you knew the dina, the malchuta, the government was corrupt and the officials of the government were just taking the money for themselves. So did you follow the law or didn't you? So they're accepting that reality and saying, okay, there are customs collectors and there are customs collectors. If we feel sure that there's a dishonest customs collector who's taking more and more than we owe, and then for their own purposes, then yes, you're allowed to lie to them. At least that's what they're suggesting. That it's a long conversation. All right. Divrei Rabbi Yana Amrei b'mokes haomed me'alav, and he says from a custom. He says this is Rabbi Yana. He says a customs collector that's really just working for himself. That's omed me'alav. So he's pretending. It's just a protection racket. He's just pretending to work from the government. Okay. So those people, in fact, so in many ways, it's saying those people go into the category of robber. And once they're in the category of robber, then you're not allowed to. I mean, you're allowed to lie to them. Okay. Rav Ashi Amar. Okay, so here we get something controversial, but we're going to hang in there. B'mokes Kanaani. So the literal translation of that is a Canaanite customs collector. But I will say, so here we get into, and we have a lot to cover here, but this is an odd and unfortunate and difficult and tragic piece of history about the Talmud is that there were censors. So non-Jews became aware of what was in the Talmud, and there was actually a period where they would burn the Talmud in the 12th century. Partly it was just a wave of anti-Semitism, but partly there were actually passages in it that they felt were dangerous to Jews that were living among non-Jews, and so they would go and they would correct the text, or they would censor the text. They would make changes.
Who are they?
So it was church officials.
Church
officials, right? Yeah. And but what was interesting is how would they know what's in the Talmud? Very often the church officials were converted Jews, so Jews who had converted, who were aware of certain passages. Because otherwise, how would they know? I mean, I know the Talmud pretty well, but there's no way I could know it all, and I couldn't be able to pick out. And I've studied a lot, and I wouldn't be able to pick out every passage that may be offensive to a non-Jew. So one of the things they did, or the Jews would self-censor. I mean, this was a time before the printing press, where they had set texts, but they would make little corrections, or they would cross things out. So a Canaanite, the word Canaanite probably was originally Kuti or Akum. Those are words that used for non-Jews. And they probably changed it to Canaanite because the Christian censors or the Jews self-censoring figure, okay, it's just about Canaanites. There's no Canaanites anymore. We all know there's no Canaanites anymore. That was a long time ago. That's biblical times. So we'll leave it in and say, okay, it's dealing with Canaanites. It's got no practical relevance. But in fact, that's probably not the discussion. The discussion in the Talmud, 5th, 6th century, was probably about Jews versus non-Jews. And now we have a rabbi, Rav Ashi, who's in Babylonia, who's suggesting that this holds for non-Jewish customs agents where you're allowed to lie, but not for Jewish ones. But in fairness to Rav Ashi, and I'm not defending it, but in fairness to him, his experience is probably that in the Jewish community we can trust our customs inspectors, whereas the non-Jews are really out for themselves, just like the Jews. That was their reality. The empires were divided into just different ethnic divisions, and you took care of yourself, and you had no reason to trust that the non-Jewish tax collectors, as we would probably trust today, because we live in a country where there are universal standards. There's not going to be standards for Jews and non-Jews, for blacks and for whites in tax collecting, whereas in those days there certainly would have been standards. Nobody would have doubted that there would be standards. So they're saying, so this particular customs collector, this law about customs collectors refers to non-Jewish ones, collecting for the non-Jewish government and not for us. And it doesn't mean Canaanite, because there's no Canaanites there. Yeah.
Does this also the censorship of the Talmud did that occur in lands where the Sephardic Jews lived?
So it occurred less. And it's really hard to say. You have to kind of go through it very, very with a fine-tooth comb, really, to find out what word was changed, what word wasn't changed. And sometimes, like, the change would be made in Christian Europe, and then the manuscripts would find their way into Sephardic areas, and they wouldn't know that they'd been changed. So the reason that we know a lot of this is because there were manuscripts that were rescued that have the original. And I don't know if this is one of them, but there were manuscripts that were rescued that have the original. But generally, the Talmud that we have comes down to us through Ashkenazi sources in Vilna, and those were the heavily censored texts. So what we study today in Yeshiva, there's a lot of censored material. A lot of it is just that. You just change one word, and You know what it means. We weren't able to recover all of it. It's an argument from science. From silence. How are we supposed to know? So, but every once in a while they'll discover new sects and new texts in old Genizas that change our understanding of what happened. Yeah.
Please explain again the motivation of the Christian censors. They were doing that to protect the Jews?
No, they were doing it to protect the Christians. They felt the Jews were studying stuff that was offensive to Christians. They didn't like it. For instance, this. I mean, if we were teaching Jews that you could cheat Christians, they didn't like that. So they didn't want that. All right. So I don't want to get bogged down in that because it's an interesting and in some ways tragic, and there's a lot you could say about it. But the whole notion of them reading our sacred texts and then fiddling with them is very disturbing, right? But they did. Right. Okay. Anyway, let's go on. So Tanya. So here's a Baraita. Yisrael v'Knaani. Now a Jew and a Canaanite. So again, probably not Canaanite there. Anasher ba'uladin. They come to court. Im atayacho lezakuhu b'dinei Yisrael. If you could defeat him using Jewish law, dinei Yisrael. Zakuhu ve'amorlo. So then you can win, and you say to him, kach dinenu, and you say that's our law. So if it's legitimate in Jewish law, and you can point to a passage in Jewish law and says I win the case because this is Jewish law, then you say that to him. B'dinei Knaanim, or if you find something in their law, because they've got laws too. Zaku v'amarlo, so you can win there and say kach dinchem, and you can say, look, I win the case according to your law. So you choose which law, whatever law works best for you, you choose, and that's the suggestion, is you make that argument. But now, so far, a little bit tricky, but we can get it. Okay, we're trying to win a law case, and you try to find the jurisdiction that works to your favor. Every lawyer here should be nodding. Yes, of course, that's what you try to do. Okay, but here's something where the lawyers will run out of the room probably. Although v'im lav ba'ima lav ba'akifin. But if you can't find the right law that supports you, then you should be crooked. Akifin, you should be crooked, and so no lawyer is going to admit that. But here you have that advice, very advice. This is in the case where you're in a lawsuit with a non-Jew. Try to work according to the law. Non-Jewish law, Jewish law, but if you can't, ba'im alav ba'akifin. Divrei Rabbi Ishmael. That's what Rabbi Ishmael says. Rabbi Akiva disagrees. Rabbi Akiva omer, ein ba'im alav ba'akifin. Rabbi Akiva says, don't do that. So don't be crooked with a non-Jew. But now he gives a reason. Mipnei kiddush Hashem. Because of the sanctification of the name. The sanctification of the name is a broad concept. Here I will narrow it to where it seems to mean it will make us look bad. It makes God look bad, but in making God look bad, making us look bad, it makes God look bad. So here's it's going to be an issue here. You don't resort to crooked legal tricks because they are necessarily because there's an inherent evil in doing that. You do it because it will make us look bad. That's what Rabbi Akiva says. It may be that Rabbi Akiva would say, well, okay, normally you can do that. You can treat non-Jews like that. But I'm telling you, that's not a good idea. Because if it makes us look bad, then it creates all sorts of difficult social situations for us, and we don't want that. It might be that might be what Rabbi Akiva means. It may not be, but he does. As soon as he gives a reason, because the reason he could say is, hey, wait a second, you just shouldn't cheat anybody. He doesn't say that. He says, Kiddush Hashem. Now, it could also mean something like, well, we want Jews to be held to the highest level of behavior, including universal standards of behavior, because that's ultimately our goal, Tikkun Olam, to make the whole world great, and by our example, we will make the whole world great. That could also be what he means. But let me just read on, then I'll take a few comments. Rabbi Akiva, so now they're analyzing. Rabbi Akiva, Tama, De'ika Kiddush Hashem. So Rabbi Akiva gives a reason. The reason is the sanctification of the God's name. Ha-leka Kiddush Hashem. So what if he didn't have that reason of exalting God's name, protecting our reputation? Ba'in, you would do it. So you would do it. You would be crooked. Okay. And now they said V'gezel Kanani Mishare. But is stealing from a non-Jew allowed? Now here the word here is Kanani. In the passage we studied last week, it wasn't Kanani. I think it was Kuti, or another word, a much broader word for non-Jew. But the original text, I'm sure, was exactly the same. And here's the discussion. The discussion is it permitted to steal? So gesel means steal, but it would include cheat. And is that permitted? Okay. There were a question or two. Ron, you had a question? Or?
Can you translate akifin as being crooked, and yet why do you hear it go around? Is there?
Well, it's a crooked path. It's the crooked path. Yeah, evasive. Yeah. 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 Right. It's not good. Whatever it is, it's not. It's the law's a straight line. Here it is. Don't go on that straight line. Go crooked and win your case. He said, win your case no matter how you can win it. Okay.
This passage, they haven't found any older transcripts. Is that?
I'm not sure. I haven't looked into it. This is the official text that we've got. There may be some old ones, but here, let me just say it's obvious. It's obvious because in other places it doesn't say Gezel Kanani, and also the rabbis are very practical. They're not going to talk about Canaanites. They don't,
I understand that.
Yeah.
But they don't go back and change it when they find it.
Oh, they don't. No, that's interesting. Eventually, this is the last thing I'll say about it because it'll get us too bogged down. But eventually, there was a law that codified the Vilna text because there was all sorts of manuscripts flying around, and there had to be an authoritative text. So it's called the Vilna text. And it's named after the Vilna Gaon, although it's not clear to me it was the Vilna Gaon who said it. But eventually, a group of rabbis got together and said, "We're not going to have a bunch of different floating texts of the Talmud. This is the official text, and so they're not going to change it no matter what, even if there's evidence that it was tampered with, even if there's evidence, as there's sometimes in that there are words left over, scribal errors. This is our text, and we're living with it." The same thing was obviously done with the Bible too. At some point, this is our text, and we're living with it. Okay.
Rabbi.
Jerusalem Talmud is a whole different Talmud. It's not. It's just a whole different set of discussions, and it's got some similarities. But yeah.
Is this the Rabbi Akiva from the turn of the?
Yes, Rabbi Akiva. Yeah. Okay.
So now they're quoting him in maybe 1200 A.D.
No.
Did he talk that way about the Romans?
No. 1200 A.D. is when the censorship of the Talmud happened. The Talmud was closed at around the year 550.
Right.
So they're quoting him in the year 500.
And this dates to 500. Okay,
about 500. The Talmud. Yeah, this is the Talmud text. The Talmud text is about 500. All right, V'hatanya. Okay, but we have another teaching. Amar Rabbi Shimon. So Rabbi Shimon says, Davar zed darash Rabbi Akiva, Shabak Kishaba Mizifirin. This is what Rabbi Akiva taught when he came from the city of Tzfirin. Minayin legezel kna'ani shehu asur. That stealing from non-Jews is forbidden. So it can't be that Rabbi Akiva feels that you're allowed to cheat in a court case against non-Jews, because Rabbi Akiva himself, it's not some other teacher, it's Rabbi Akiva himself that taught and derived from the Torah that you're forbidden to steal from non-Jews. And now here's his exegesis of a text, which I want to say is a little complicated and kind of beside the point, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But Talmud Lomar, okay, so this is a passage in Leviticus that says that you should redeem your slaves. You should redeem Jewish slaves. A slave becomes a Jew becomes an Israelite becomes enslaved. It's incumbent upon the Jewish community to redeem that person, and we still have that law. So you're redeeming prisoners of war, and it's still actually a live issue in Jewish communities. And not that long ago, it was a very live issue. Okay, so this is the law from this is the verse from Scripture, which we expand to freeing all non-Jews. Okay, but how do you do that? Shaloyim shechenu v'yetzeh. Okay, that in fact you're not allowed just to take him. You have to pay the non-Jew. The assumption is the non-Jew is holding this person as a slave. And remember, in those days, this is biblical times, in those days, there were slaves. Slaves were bought and sold. So the slave was a legitimate property of the non-Jew. So we learn from this passage that you actually pay the slave owner for the slave. Now, you have to do it. You have to gather the money and pay. But you're not allowed just to steal the slave back. And that's how Rabbi Akiva figures that you're not allowed to steal, that you're not allowed to steal from non-Jews. Because if you're allowed to steal from non-Jews, why bother even telling you how much you're supposed to pay? Obviously, you're supposed to pay. Okay. Now the answer back might be Yacholi Glom Alav. All right. Well, maybe that non-Jew is trying to raise the price, and therefore you should be able to steal. And the answer back, Talmud Lomar. And then the Torah then responds to that, or the rabbis here are responding using the Torah, that you're supposed to negotiate a fair price. It does say that. You're supposed to negotiate a fair price. Yidakdek im konehu, that you negotiate the fair price. So the idea that you're negotiating a fair price with a non-Jew for a slave means obviously you're not allowed to steal. You're not allowed to be crooked at all. Because why is the Torah saying negotiate a fair price? Okay, so Rabbi Akiva learns from this that you're never allowed to steal from non-Jews or cheat non-Jews. All right. So now, but Rav Yosef says, so earlier we had a comment from Rabbi Akiva that maybe you were allowed to steal from non-Jews or cheat non-Jews. So what's going on here? Mav Rav Yosef says, Lo kasha, this is not a disagreement, this is not a conflict. Ha b'kna'ni, ha b'ger toshav. All right, so now we're splitting non-Jews into different categories, okay? So one is your standard non-Jew, the Canaanite. But there's another non-Jew, which we trust more, and which we're going to be in better relationship with, a ger toshav. The ger toshav is the non-Jew who lives with us. All right. So in the context of a sovereign Jewish state, it's a minority, right? Israel is a Jewish country. I mean, they imagine here in the Talmud Israel being a Jewish country, and they're looking back at a time when it was. But even then, I mean, it's not as if it was ever a pure. That's not even a good word, but there was always non-Jews that were living there, and there was a word for them, a ger toshav. They were ger toshav. They had lots of rights and responsibilities. They didn't have the same rights and responsibility as Jews, which for a universalist is problematic. They would take that for granted. But now we're dividing non-Jews and non-Jews into different categories. So what Rabbi Akiva they're suggesting ends up saying is you can cheat the generic non-Jews, but those ones that live with us. And this could be the Kiddush Hashem issue. So we want to develop good relationships. We want to make sure that that our reputation is good, that we can have business dealings with them. So for the ger toshav, you shouldn't steal. But others, and I'm not sure what he means by others, because they're the ones that don't live with us. Well, I mean, we're right. I mean, how are we going to encounter them? But it's just a stab at maybe trying to explain what Rabbi Akiva meant and kind of making this whole very uncomfortable subject work. How do we make it work? Okay. I'm going to keep going. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It sets the tone for the way of the land. That's the basis that you were talking about.
Yeah,
before.
right.
So if this is the way that the majority of the people are supposed to operate, then those who are not Jewish living in that same community should operate.
Yeah.
We should operate with them the same way.
Right. Well, obviously there would be a terrible system, if yeah. Okay. So Amar le Abai. Okay, but now Abai objects to this and says Vahat tarvayu. Gabe Hadadi Kativ. He says that you can't make that distinction, since first of all, I think he's understanding from a practical and ethical point of view. You can't once you start making those distinctions. I mean, is it a border? Is it a tourist? It's interesting. A lot of cultures have that, right? Yeah. That you can cheat tourists. Right. I mean, it's not going to be written in a law anywhere. You are allowed to cheat tourists, but a whole lot of businessmen understand that, and right. So the visitors can come and it's just a tourist, and they have all the money anyway, and they deserve it, and so you catch a little bit of that in here. But Abai is going to say they're actually both in the same verse. It's a ger toshav, a resident alien. That's the technical definition of it, and non-Jews in general. Lo lecha. Ela lager, because the word means, I'll explain this in a second, to you rather than just the ger, the non-Jew, Shnei Amar, lager. Okay, so it says, this is actually what it's talking about in redeeming the slave. You go to the ger, okay, which means non-Jew. Velo lager tzedek, ela lager toshav. So now we have a confusion with the word ger. So not the ger, which would mean stranger, which would mean non-Jew. That's what it says in the Torah. So it's saying that means not ger tzedek, because a ger tzedek there means someone who's converted. It means a righteous Gentile. Well, so it means a righteous stranger. A righteous stranger is a stranger who became a Jew. And I mentioned weeks ago, just to confuse everybody, that the word ger ultimately comes to mean convert, but it's just shortening of the actual term for convert, which is ger tzedek, a righteous stranger. A righteous stranger actually becomes a Jew. So the verse doesn't refer to a convert, someone who's converted to Judaism. That's obvious from the context, so it has to mean ger toshav, the resident alien, but it also, in general, has to refer to non-Jew in general.
There were people who were living the Jewish life who weren't circumcised also at that time.
Yeah, who were circumcised or weren't? Oh, we're living a Jewish life?
So they were. So in other words, they followed the traditions and the principles, but were not circumcised.
Yeah, and no, there were people. This way, all these categories are very interesting. We don't have time to delve that deeply into them. We'll continue next week, but I'll say that the ger toshav, the resident alien, it's a phrase with a very interesting history because, as you said, it was actually adopted by a number of non-Jews over the years, over the millennia, who decided there's a lot I like about Judaism. I'm going to do a lot. I'm going to keep kosher. I like Shabbat a lot. I like studying. I like the stuff that you guys do. Circumcision, look, I got to draw the line somewhere. I'm not crazy about that. Plus, I'm not going to go through the conversion process, but I'm going to call myself a ger toshav, meaning I'm with you. I'm going to identify with you, but just not fully. So you have that. I have met people today, the Christians, that are aware of the terminology and they adopt it. And so you can think of me as a ger toshav, and they impress me knowing the phrase itself. It's a rabbinic concept because in the Bible it's hard to know. No, in the Bible it means a resident alien, which is a very practical designation. You have a Jewish country, but you're always going to have non-Jews that live there. But it expands, as you said, to people that decide there's a lot they like about Judaism, and apparently in the Roman Empire there were a lot of those people that were very interested in Jewish ideas, very interested in Jewish life, but didn't want the whole package.
So their children what would their children be?
Whatever they wanted to be. I mean, it wasn't. They were never considered Jews.
So
they didn't consider themselves Jews.
Right.
They didn't consider themselves Jews, and they didn't, and the Jews didn't consider them Jews.
Yeah.
But they would hang out. They would come to shul. They would. We still have something like that. They may not call them that. People that are exploring with Judaism, maybe thinking about converting, not converting. Maybe they married into the Jewish family, and there's a lot they like about it, but they're not willing to take that last step, which is to convert to Judaism. So you're right. It's and in a discussion about boundaries, which this is a discussion about boundaries, because if I'm allowed to steal from them, then you better know who them is.
Right.
And suddenly we have this very gray area of what them is, and the rabbis in this is why it's such a nuanced discussion. They're starting to divide the them into different categories. And all right, just a little bit more. Shenamar leger toshav mishpachat ger zeh oved kochavim. Okay, kishu omer ola aker. Okay, so now again, in the verse that tells you about you should redeem your slaves from the non-Jews, there's all sorts of possibilities. One is an idolater. One is a pagan. Ze'anim kar levad kochavim. And so you could be sold, to all sorts of different types of people. All sorts of different types of non-Jews.
Right.
Could be a ger toshav. It could be a pagan. It could be some that worship stars and moons, which you're not allowed to do. But the verse seems to include all of them. You're not supposed to cheat any of them. So now even though, yes, you and I could divide the non-Jewish world into all sorts of different categories, the problem is the words of the verse itself are extremely inclusive. And so therefore it just must mean non-Jews in general. Okay. All right. So then we go to, and we'll stop. Well, we'll see. Got a little time. El Amar Rava. So Rava says, Lo kasha. So it's not that you can divide the non-Jewish world in different categories. It's the term stealing or cheating that maybe we should divide, right? And find multiple definitions for. Kan b'gzelo. Okay, so one would be gzela, which would be theft, which you're not allowed to do. V'kan b'hafka'at halavato. But maybe what you are allowed to do, or maybe the opposite too. It may be that you're not allowed to do that, but you are allowed to do the other, is cancel a debt. Okay, and this is before you get too excited. It doesn't mean that you're allowed just to walk away from a debt with a non-Jew. It may be that we Jews have certain laws about canceling debts, right? We do. The seventh year, you cancel a debt, right? There's other ways, by the way, in the Torah which you cancel a debt. What this rabbi is suggesting is that the laws about canceling debts only apply in our community, and they don't apply for non-Jews. So in the sabbatical year, a non-Jew is not allowed to come to you and say, hey, I hear you Jews have this great custom. You cancel debts, so we're free, right? And you say, no, it doesn't apply to you. It only applies to us. Now, if that's the case, that starts to sound a little bit more reasonable. I'm not crazy about it, right? I mean, if you're in favor of universal principles, then you're not in favor. But we could imagine, some principles that only apply to our community. It's not stealing from a non-Jew to say our sabbatical year doesn't apply to you. This is how we build our own Jewish society. So right away, it's interesting how the moral intent doesn't go up as much as it did with you're allowed to steal from non-Jews.
Is the converse true?
What?
If a Jew borrows money from a non-Jew?
No, very law wouldn't apply to this.
No.
If it doesn't apply, it doesn't apply. Yeah. First of all, there's no way you can make a non-Jew follow Jewish law. So I guess it's a good question, but it would really depend on the non-Jew. Like if I were to go and say to somebody, look, in Estonian law, I don't have to pay you. The guy would say, great. Well, I don't follow Estonian law. So so the non-Jew is going to say I don't follow Jewish law. unless it's to his benefit.
Yeah.
Well, if it's
Yeah.
a closed community.
Yes, if it's a closed community, then then that would be the question. Yeah. Okay. All right. We'll stop here. We'll continue with the next one.
Sharia law doesn't guarantee that either.